as music listeners, we don't really value music that much to tend to pay for it. But there have been artists like Kanye's about to do, and like Nipsey Hussle has done in the past, or other artists who have proven that they can release albums and sell them for $100 and
I think there's a
in limited
certain
quantities.
novelty to like physical copy. Like the thing with so the stem player, I like maybe the $200 price tag is not so absurd because it is a physical copy at the end of the day. It's on a physical product. So like that I get it. But the thing I don't like is the exclusivity of it being on that. So like you can spend $200 on an album on a vinyl that you really cherish and really want, but you can also listen to it for a subscription to Spotify anytime you want.
It's a luxury.
It's a luxury good. And when you're exclusively releasing it on a certain platform that you have to spend a lot of money on, especially when it's an artist like Kanye or an artist like Jay-Z, who have in the past talked about accessibility to music being a problem, it's
incredibly hypocritical. So hypocritical.
And I just like, you're right. Like I'm kind of like already out on it because I don't even care about this album that much. But even a Kanye fan should be questioning like, where is his? I mean, even Kanye fans I think are skeptical of where his like actual values lie. But like when you're demanding that someone spend that capital on some, especially when you're already a fucking billionaire, when you're like, it's hypocritical.
That's the crux of it. That's the crux of it. Like the billionaire aspect,
very privileged. Yeah.
It comes from a very, very, very privileged point of view because you're already mega wealthy. So of course you can take this risk commercially and say, oh, I'm gonna only put it on the stem player. Just like he said, oh, Pablo's only gonna be on Tidal. Like, do you think people give a fuck? They're gonna fucking pirate it anyway. And he knows that, but if he knows that so well, why is he following through with this? That's the crux of it. Because it's like, I just don't see this as I don't see this the way Kanye sees it. Maybe that's me.
Right.
Maybe that's me.
If he's aware of the fact that like someone's gonna pirate it anyway, then and is throwing caution in the wind and doing it anyway, even though he's aware of all these other factors at play, then at the end of the day, it's gimmicky. It's not even about like if you know that there's another route, then you're just doing it for the attention of it. Like it's not, people aren't going to spend the $200 and they're still going to get to listen to the album. So if you do it anyway, it's just to do it, which I just also think is like, I don't know.
The Kanye way, the Kanye model.
I mean, I guess that makes sense for him. Like it's true to him, but like at the end of the day, I don't care that much. Like I'm in my. It probably seems like I'm frustrated because I just think it's like if I wasn't like a strong Kanye fan that really wanted to listen to this album, and the only way I was going to do it is to either not support the artist if I care about the artist and illegally stream it or pirate it, or spend more money than I'm willing to spend on it, then it's like you're putting me between a rock and a hard place. And I just think that's kind of bogus to me. I just like don't respect that kind of artistry, especially in music.
I just think if you're really down to make music accessible, as Jay-Z has said, as Kanye has said, why don't you just get a group of geniuses, which they have no issue doing ever.
Yes.
Because Kanye has hands in all these pots creatively. Why don't you just make your own streaming service that's wildly inexpensive? And then build from there. Like, not just saying you only have your catalog on the streaming service, but start pulling other artists, ask them. Because like this is basically just like Makami 2.0. Like, oh, you're gonna have to spend $200 to hear this shit. And if you don't, sorry, you'll never fucking hear it. You know what I mean? Like obviously it's different because Kanye is like literally like the most popular musician of the past 20 years, at least.
But like, this is interesting though. Like, how do we? Because I want to know how we increase the value of art, based on this. Because or how do we push that? Because I do very much believe in like, bro, not everything is for everybody. Not every piece of art is meant to be consumed by everybody. So, and yes, I agree that putting, you know, like to the point of frivolous amounts of money to some, like into how much something is going to cost, it's definitely a barrier that separates you from people that you definitely are trying to, I imagine you're trying to communicate with. Like, I'm sure Makami doesn't only want to speak to people with money, but at the same time, he believes in this investor model of fanship, putting your money where your mouth is as a fan. You know, how do we sort of get to that where we raise the value? Because especially with streaming, and I agree the accessibility of it is probably the most important aspect to it, but the you know, the devaluing of music that is inevitable with all the streaming platforms is also something that we're trying to combat. I know the three of us are not streaming. We're not big on streaming companies, so I'm just wondering.
Fuck all of them, bro.
Like it's not every streaming service. Bandcamp has a model, like,
absolutely perfect,
will never
beautiful.
get the backing. Bandcamp's never going to be popular enough for Kanye West to release his music exclusively on Bandcamp, but that's a great model if you want to raise the value of art without sacrificing like
the accessibility.
Then Bandcamp has been the only one that has done it right.
I was gonna say, back in the day, because I'm obviously not a big Radiohead fan anymore because I grew up a little bit. But the shit they did with In Rainbows, like they just straight up, they straight up dropped In Rainbows on their website for free,
right?
Or a similar model to Bandcamp, where it's like, oh, if you want to spend this much money on it, help us out. Like it's basically like they did a Kickstarter for an album that they already did, and they're like, hey, if you want to give us money for it, give us money for it. If you don't, listen to the album,
right?
Like. And that aspect of it, I like that kind of model, even though Radiohead's music is largely boring as fuck to me.
Yo, here's an interesting thing I just thought about. Here's an interesting thing I thought about too. And maybe, I don't know if this is exactly true, but this is one thing we definitely don't consider as fans sometimes, is like there are business aspects to who gets a share of what record or music that you make. If you go the same route everybody else does and you make an album and you put it up on, you know, and you put it up on streaming services and you're selling the album and shit like that. I almost wonder if like selling a physical piece of merch or an album within a product, like a stem player, like he was, you know, like that is like aimed in that direction of like, what I'm saying is artists, they usually tend to make a lot more money selling their physical merch or selling, you know, like actual products and shit, like the actual record that the company owns and that gets played here and there and streamed, blah, blah, blah. Like somebody takes money from that, another person takes money from that, and then, you know, eventually it comes to you. So I almost wonder if that is a part of this too. Like,
well, that's like another layer to the stem player specifically, whereas like a $200 vinyl is an existing novelty. Or like a CD, a physical copy of an album is an existing novelty. A stem player is specifically for Kanye West
for
and Kanye
album.
West alone.
An album
so,
in a
cup.
So
you get that, and maybe he plugs more music on it someday, or like maybe more artists join in. But those are all maybes. It's a complete unknown to a general audience. So like. The incentive, like I'm saying, like I'm not going to judge anybody for spending $200 on this. In fact, I encourage it if you care about the album so much, because at the end of the day, I have $100 vinyls and I've spent that money on it because I care about that album. And I just think like for someone who just wants to casually listen to an album, for someone who wants to review the album, it's not accessible. So I have no interest in it. Like, that's just like my personal opinion. I don't think it devalues the art to say that I don't think that's like a viable option for me to spend money on that album. Like,
no, it doesn't.
I think that's fine to critique that.
I think the point that you're getting
but I think you're right. I think we do need to critically think about how you do maximize value for art. But I just don't think that's the route. Like,
you're kind of saying what I definitely believe in that. Like, I'm with you. Like, this album to me is not worth $200 to go spend. Nor do I feel like Kanye needs my $200 on this album, right? We all like, obviously we agree there. And like you, I don't know if I have like $100 vinyl, but I'm with you in the sense that when the art is worth, I mean, art, music, an album can be worth hundreds of dollars to you. I think is the point that I'm trying to, I think that
totally.
we're all trying to get at here, that like,
that fucking Wu-Tang album that Mark Shkreli had is $25,000, but that's a 1-of-1. So like there, you know, I think there's ways you do it.
Yeah,
I think
there has to
I'm
be
not
a
saying it's
space
like
where
absurd to spend $200 on music, but
I think like that all of these scenarios that we're discussing, like a vinyl, that's something that you buy after you hear the album. Also, for the most part. Of course, there are like smaller artists who like you can pre-order, you get the album early, so that's your first shot to hear it.
Right.
But in this digital age, why am I going to put $200 up front for an album I have not heard? In most circumstances, you're not going to do that. I get it's Kanye and he's one of the most prolific artists ever, but it's like, even then, am I going to shell out $200 to hear this billionaire's 11th album?
Yeah.
That I don't even know exists or not? Like, we've heard two songs.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, with some
like this shit. And this goes back to the straw that broke the camel's back was when the Joe Rogan Neil Young situation, because like Neil, I'm not saying Neil Young is this fucking model citizen, because he's also kind of a piece of shit in his own right, but like the whole crux of it is this streaming service gave this dopey shit $300 million, like basically up front, to just do a podcast. Meanwhile, these artists on streaming, they're making like ugats for it. Like they're getting fucking next to nothing for art that they put their whole, like, they're making their career this path. And I'm not saying that all artists deserve the most amount of money for but at least fucking give them a decent ratio of streams to dollars.
Okay, but that's that's where I think, like, because it's Kanye West, Jay-Z, like these mega stars, these well-respected icons in hip-hop, in music, just in general, they have the power, they have the ability, the resources, the power, like you said, Ben, to fucking congregate a group of geniuses to come up with I don't mind making a title. I don't mind making a streaming service that is, you know, started out with your own music, that is the way that people access your music. These guys have the pull to bring in any artist they want. You think any artist is going to say no to Kanye West, like asking them to be on his streaming service? I just think because
you'll
it's
be the
Kanye
first
West,
person on there.
Right. I just think
it's the best.
It's Kanye West. He needs to do either the bare minimum in a lot of things, or he's so zany, manic, crazy that he needs to do the maximum. So like he needs to do the most. And that's why I don't think like he's the artist to like push this needle. I don't think he's going to be the one that like comes up with the right thing. I think this was his idea. Like the stem player thing is his idea of like sticking it to the man, or like whatever it might be. But Kanye West like is so zany, so wacky, that it had to be this ultimate, like,
I think it's to the point
bigger than it is. Like, I think the idea is there. Like,
he's bigger than any fucking label or anything now. It's got to the point where I think it was probably like post Dark Fantasy, where he had like the point where he had the leverage to get into fashion, design, like all this shit. And he's like, yeah, like all these people at Nike fucked me over, so I went over to Adidas. But it's like I feel like sometimes, obviously he's incredibly narcissistic. How much pull he actually has, because he's like, oh, I'm going to do this stem player thing as a fuck you to labels and fuck you to making like me a wage slave. But it's like everybody would follow in his lead. Right. If he just was like, oh, I'm going to make an accessible streaming service. I'm going to make an accessible, viable option for people to consume art that they deem valuable. It's like superseding and going over the fact that these labels have validity, which day by day in this digital age, they don't. Yeah, we bring it back to
labels. Yeet. That's where you start.
we bring it back to Yeet. Like, this dude is just doing shit on his own. He did not need any label backing. He just needs other creative backings. like other artists to like put people onto him. Like that's it. Like that's all it really comes down to. Your power as an artist with a following is way more powerful than getting a cosign from a fucking label that's gonna just exploit your talent and your creativity.
At some point, those labelers are gonna come to you with a bag. Like if you have the sauce, if you have the following, if you have like someone like with Yeats, like numbers and plant in the game right now, like the leverage that you get even approaching or getting approached by a record label or anyone that wants to do business with you is so much bigger tenfold when you've already proven your own concept and you already like have your own base of fans that are going to tap in with your next move. Your next move, you got people ready at the floodgates to come in.
Right.
And a lot of artists get signed at a point when the record label is actually doing them a favor. They are actually the gateway between the amount of exposure that this artist hopes and wants to have. And not everybody's a Yeet and just like coming out of nowhere.
Man, labels are like it's unfortunately labels for the most part are vultures. Like they do recognize like a vulnerable position in an artist's career, and they infiltrate it and take over. And most of the time, like sometimes it's a success story. Like especially like to an outside perspective, from a fan's perspective, they see a label sign an artist, they blow up, it looks all great. But at the end of the day, like that label is going to be making more money than that artist is off of their own artistry. So that's why I think a lot of people are.
And that label is making most of their money on 2 or 3 artists or one artist that's helping, what's the word I'm looking for? Subsidize like all of the other acts on the roster. And if you're not that artist, like you're gonna have some struggles and you're gonna be put on ice